Revenge of the Bully, Chapter 3, called Twin Problems. You there! You paying attention? It was Mr. Scab, my woodshop teacher. I'd been staring at the clock on the wall for half the class, hoping against hope I could slow down time. It was the last period. Football practice was just minutes away. Mr. Scab banged on my desk. What's your name? Rodney. Rodney? I once chose not to pay attention to during woodshop. You know what happened? No, I squeaked. This. He held up his hand. I swallowed as I looked at his missing pinky. Think that's bad? He continued. Want me to remove my glass eye? I was trying to decide if he was serious when the bell rang. I headed down the hall, relieved that Mr. Scab hadn't lost any other body parts while talking to me. Unfortunately, my relief was short-lived. I was heading to football practice. My stomach gurgled louder and louder with each step. It was the second day of school, and I soon would be helmet to helmet with Trevor and his buddies. I rounded the corner. Coach Lombardi was standing in the crowded hallway outside the gym arguing with a woman. He motioned for me to come over. Rodney, I got some bad news. The nurse says you need to have your parents fill out a permission slip and bring in a record of your physical. Sorry, but it looks like you won't be able to make practice. No practice? I almost jumped up and down. Finally, some good luck. I let out a deep breath. Rodney! A man's voice shouted from down the hallway. There you are! I turned around, along with every other student, to see my dad waving his arms and heading my way. I sort of waved back, thinking, please go away. Young man, do you know that person? The nurse asked. A crowd of kids began to gather. Great. They would all know I was the one with the weirdo dad. He's my father, I eventually admitted. Excellent! Coach Lombardi hollered. Rodney, my dad called out as he approached us, I thought I'd come down and watch your first practice. So, you're my new star's dad? I'm head coach Lombardi. I watched the two shake hands. You know, now that you're here, you could sign Rodney's release, and he'll be able to practice. He'll still need a copy of his physical, the nurse interrupted. I was beginning to like this nurse. Don't worry, my dad offered. Now that I have a little more time on my hands, I was able to go on the district website and read all the requirements to play interscholastic sports. I got the physical right here. I got his mouthpiece and jockstrap too. You know where this goes, right, son? He held up the jockstrap. Dad, I know where it goes, I whispered. By now all I heard was the sound of kids laughing. I couldn't bear to look up. Well done, Mr. Rathbone, yelled Lombardi. Active parents make all the difference. Now, Rodney, go see Assistant Coach Manuel and get fitted for your pads. I'll see you out on the field. Mr. Rathbone, it was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you, Coach. And Rodney, I'll see you after practice. Whatever, I muttered as I walked off to get fitted. Wait! My dad suddenly shouted from down the hall. You forgot something! Oh no, I thought. But sure enough, I turned around to see my father waving the jockstrap high above his head. Luckily, only about 200 other kids seemed to notice. 20 minutes later, I found myself walking out of the tunnel under the gym toward the football practice field. It was my first time wearing football pads. Besides what my dad had brought me, I had on a helmet, shoulder pads, rib protectors, hip pads, a tailbone pad in the back of my pants, thigh pads, knee pads, and a mouth guard. That's all you got? I had asked Coach Manuel. I liked the idea of being covered in a modern-day suit of armor, especially when I got to the field and saw I was the smallest kid on it. Rodney, this is awesome, Josh barked at me. I can't wait. His eyes sparkled from inside his helmet. Now there was a football player. While he might have been younger than some of the other guys, he was the biggest. All right, take a knee over here, Coach Lombardi called out. We all huddled around. I could feel sets of eyes staring at me through face masks. Some were friendly, many were not. Coach Lambardi cleared his throat. As many of you know, we've been through a tough time these past few years. We haven't had a winning season in over 12 years. Even worse, we haven't beat. He paused and his face scrunched up into a wretched expression. We haven't beat Wyndham in 17 years. 18. Coach Manuel corrected him. Lambardi scowled for a minute. You hear that? 18 years of misery. Whoever said winning isn't everything never played football. That numbskull certainly didn't have to endure the jokes and ridicule of Coach Bill Belichick. He's always picking on me. He shook his head and looked at his feet. I thought I saw his lip quiver. His eyes looked damp. I just want to beat Belichick and Wyndham once before I retire. After a moment, his voice sounded strong again. I was beginning to believe I would never beat them, but yesterday I saw something wondrous. Something that told me the black cloud that's been hanging over Garrettsville might finally be lifting. I noticed Josh glance up at the sky with a confused look on his face. Coach Lambardi, who had stopped in back of where we were kneeling, placed his hands on Josh's and my shoulder pads. He turned to the rest of the team and announced, Let me introduce you to our new starting backfield, Rathbone and Dombrowski. They have just the kind of toughness we've been lacking around here. Thank God he didn't notice my knees beginning to shake under all that padding. I can't wait to see them in action, he continued. In fact, let's not wait any longer. Now, I know we don't scrimmage the first week. That's good, I thought to myself, but I'm willing to make an exception. We have enough guys here from last year to run some plays. Let's see what the new guys Rathbone and Dombrowski can do. Trevor, take the defense out to the 20-yard line and let's get started. I watched Trevor's helmet nod. Then, with a wicked look, he pointed at me and mouthed the words, You're mine. I had an urge to puke, but pictured bits of last night's fancy French dinner getting caught in my face mask and managed to keep it down. In a fog, I followed the other offensive players as we made our way onto the striped field. I was about to get crushed and torn apart. Noticing several groups of students filing into the stands did little to make me feel better. A familiar voice rang out from one of the spectators. Go get him, Rodney! It was Rishi sitting with my dad. He waved and held up his phone. Don't worry, this takes great video. I walked into the offensive huddle. Apart from Josh, the other faces were unfamiliar. I was relieved to see they weren't menacing. In fact, many of the guys smiled down at me through their face masks. A bunch of them were as big as Josh, and I assumed they were the offensive line. One of the biggest, a tall black kid with a friendly smile, stuck out his hand. Welcome to the football team. I shook his big hand and breathed easier. Thanks. No, let us thank you. We're sure glad you're joining the offense, Rodney. My name is Joe. I'm the center. JJ and AJ are your tackles, and Philip and Frank are the guards. We're the offensive line. I couldn't believe it. These guys were nice and seemed genuinely happy to see me. Not only that, each player was bigger than the next. As I had learned with Josh, it was good to have big friends. Frank said, We heard all about you last year, of course. Yeah, AJ added. I still can't believe someone attacked the McThug brothers and lived to talk about it. JJ blurted, I still watch your fight off the Ravine of Doom on YouTube. Joe smiled. Like I said, we were all real happy when we heard you were joining us. You see, we were kind of hoping you'd be able to help us with some of our problems. The good feeling in my chest was replaced by a tight, uncomfortable feeling. The faces had lost the smiles a moment ago, and they now looked frightened. You see, Rodney, Joe explained, we've been getting bullied quite a bit by a real mean group. The tight, uncomfortable feeling in my chest was quickly replaced by difficulty breathing and a racing heart. This was getting worse by the second. And these guys were a head taller than me, and 100 pounds heavier. What group could possibly be nasty enough to bully them? And what could I possibly do about it? Over the pounding of my tiny heart, I heard myself ask, "It's Trevor and his gang, right? Are they the cause of your problems?" Joe looked surprised and almost laughed. If it was Trevor, I could handle it. These guys are much worse. I'm talking about. He stopped short and looked from side to side before making sure it was safe to continue. Finally, he whispered, "I'm talking about the Wyndham team." "Two in particular," JJ added. "Twin brothers." "Exactly," Joe said. "They come over here after school." "Oh no," JJ gasped, staring at the sideline. "They're here." The huddle collectively shuddered. I snuck a peek. You couldn't miss the twin giants. "So can you help us?" Joe asked. Trevor had wandered by and was waiting to hear my reply. Suddenly I was living out my worst nightmare. At Baber Intermediate, I had built a reputation as a kid who feared no one, despite the fact that I'm pure coward through and through. It was all by accident, of course, but now I realized that none of my past victories meant much in this new, larger world. If I acted afraid, my whole Rodney reputation would vanish. Once it was gone, I'd be the #1 bully target in Garrettsville. Heck, maybe all of Ohio. I had to pretend to be tough, but how? Before I had a chance to answer, Coach Lombardi shouted, "All right, let's run a play." "We'll talk about Wyndham later," Joe said. For the time being, I was safe. But for how long? Another kid in a number 16 jersey cleared his throat. He'd been quiet up until now. "We'll run a basic sweep. Sound good to you, Rodney?" "Huh?" I was so busy worrying about my reputation that I had forgotten about football. "Oh, hey, my name's Hector. I'm the quarterback. I broke a state record last year." With a star quarterback, maybe we wouldn't have to run the ball that much. "A state record, that's great," I said. "Yeah, I broke the record for getting sacked the most times in one season, 79, thanks to this great offensive line. That's 72 or 22 more times than Johnny Pancake Stevenson. I just regained feeling in my feet last week." I glanced over at the offensive line. Joe and the rest of the guys looked sheepish. No one was arguing. "I'm not planning to throw the ball this year," Hector continued. "Not once. Good luck running it. But with these wimps blocking for you, well, I just hope you get the bed with the window." "What window?" I asked. "What bed?" "At the hospital, man. So, you ready?" "You sure know how to motivate a guy," I grumbled. He ignored that. "I'll flip you the ball. You run around the right side. Let's go. The snap is on 2. I grabbed Josh. "You stay in front of me, and if anyone comes near me, you hit him, okay?" "Yeah." Josh was my only hope for survival. I was already wondering which state record I'd be going for, most broken bones or wettest pants. I shook off further thoughts. Hector stopped walking to a spot behind the center and headed back toward Josh and me. He seemed to want to remind us something. When he got within a couple of feet, Josh took 2 steps, lowered his shoulder, and flattened him to the ground. "I done what you said, Rodney." Hector lay gasping on the field. "So much for the feeling and my feet returning." I knelt down. "Sorry about that. Josh isn't new to the kind of sport." "It's okay," Hector wheezed. "I'm used to it. I was going to remind you to try to run out of bounds. Trevor and the defense love to pile on top of the runner." I looked in Trevor's direction and shuddered. He and the rest of the defense were staring hungrily at me. To help set the mood, some band kids in the stands struck up a tune that sounded a lot like the theme from the movie Jaws. Da-da, 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 da. I had just made up my mind to bolt home when Hector yelled, "Hut, hut!" The gold and black bodies in front of me collided with a crunch. I watched in horror as my golden offensive line fell to the ground, offering minimal resistance to the black shirts that swarmed in my direction. Hector just managed to get the ball away before being swallowed up. The ball flipped through the air several times in my direction, and I grabbed it without thinking. The black shirts growled and swarmed onward. Josh smashed the first two, but Trevor sprinted by him as Josh wrestled with a third. Two more frightening linebackers were a step behind Trevor. They all looked like sharks ready to feast upon some foolish swimmer. The band's choice in music made perfect sense. And that's when my instincts, my ultra-cowardly, ultra-chicken instincts, swept through me and took full control over my nervous system. My legs spun into action. They must have looked like two whirlwinds in a cartoon. I ran hard to my right, away from Trevor. I would have run straight to the sideline, but a defensive end ran out in front of me. Knowing that I was about to get crushed between four thugs, I turned hard and sprinted down the field away from the horror behind me. My fear was giving me bionic speed. "That's my boy!" I heard my dad shout as I flew by. I was making a run like I did at field day the year before, and I was going in for a touchdown. The wind was rushing through my face mask as my feet tore down the right sideline. The old Rathbone luck was still with me until someone dove at my legs. Jumping instinctively to my right, I plowed straight into two gigantic kids standing on the sideline. Their heads banged together as all three of us flew into the air. I was the first to land and watched the other two hit the ground with deafening thuds. Rishi charged down from the stands. "That was great," he shouted. "You hit them like a bowling ball smashing two pins. I got it all on video." The two guys I had clobbered weren't as pleased. As they staggered to their feet, covered in mud and grass and rubbing their heads, I realized it was the Wyndham twins. Towering over me, one of them growled, "I know you did that on purpose." He spit some dirt from his mouth. "Too bad we can't properly introduce ourselves with so many witnesses around, but we'll be seeing you soon enough. Bart and Bruno, remember those names." Still dazed from the collision, I watched them walk off. "Rathbone! That was the best run I've seen in years!" It was the excited face of Coach Lambardi staring down at me. "In a real game, the spectators won't be right next to the field. Unlucky. But with you handling the ball, I see big things for this team. Big things." "Super job, son!" my dad yelled from the sideline as I rose to my feet. Joe clasped my shoulder. "I knew we could count on you to take care of those guys." "Me too," JJ added. "It's great to have our backs. Finally, someone who's not afraid of anything." Boy, was I glad my sister wasn't around to hear that one. And that's the end of chapter 3.